Hello and welcome to a new episode of Reptile TV. My slightly nervous intro animal, probably stage fright, is a beautiful red Aki, which is a spiny-tailed monitor, Varanus acantharus. There are the different types, red Aki, yellow Aki, but I'll just call them Aki for now. So in the past, they were all just called spiny-tailed monitors, but now, because of their wide distribution, they have different color variations or morphs. And these red Akis in particular are quite popular. This handsome guy here is one of them too. This is a male that's just under 2 years old, so he's basically fully grown, or you could say, an adult. We actually got him back, more or less by chance. As a juvenile, he looked like a female. But now, unfortunately, it turned out that he is actually a male, and the person who got them ended up with 2 males. That's why, in the end, we had to exchange one male for a female, and that's how we eventually got him back. What's really great to see is just how beautifully and vividly his colors have developed over time. This deep, vibrant red is truly striking, incredibly rich, and clearly pronounced. It's quite remarkable. So really red Aki, just as he should be. In terms of temperament, they're actually pretty chill and easygoing. Like I said, he's just a little bit excited, and he really wants to look around and explore, I think. But honestly, it's not out of any kind of meanness. It's just simple curiosity. And yeah, a really beautiful animal. Truly a fantastic terrarium pet. These spiny-tailed monitors are also quite manageable in size, with a terrarium of about 1.5 meters, I'd say. Such a handsome little guy, my intro animal for you all today. This dream animal from the intro also fits perfectly with today's topic. Today's topic, I'm living, or rather, working my dream. So that's the classic saying, I'm living my dream. In my case, I would actually say that largely applies, as cliched and flat as that may sound. The idea came to me just a few weeks ago, actually, when I was once again in Africa, had some business to take care of there, and saw some really amazing animals again, and also met great, kind people. So it's not always just about the animals. Meeting people is also really amazing. But the whole experience, being able to live through all of that, I was kind of daydreaming to myself and thought, what I'm doing really is a dream. And that's actually true, and that's what I want to tell you a little bit about today. Now the question, why is it my dream? Even as a child, I was absolutely crazy about animals, especially reptiles, but really animals in general. I was born in 1969, so I grew up as a child of that era. Back then, there were shows like Daktari, so those of you who are a bit older will definitely know it. Or there was another show. I really need to Google it sometime to see if I can find anything about it. It was called Orso Way, Little Son of the Great Chief, or something like that. Well, good. So about the chief, I have to say, actually it was supposed to be North American, but it really wasn't because there were things like cobras. I still remember one episode where he had to reach into a place with a cobra as some kind of courage test, and so on. I also found that totally fascinating and everything. And then there was Heinz Seelman and Professor Chimek. Professor Chimek had. What was the name of the show? A Place for Animals, that's right. A Place for Animals was the show. So, shows like that completely fascinated and captivated me. Shows like that with animals where people were researching them, where I have to say, even just getting to touch the animals. I know a lot of you will say, oh, touching animals is terrible, and so on. And in a way, you're right, but that's just how people are. So when I saw on TV, for example on Daktari, that they were walking around holding hands with a chimpanzee and so on, I really dreamed about that. That was my dream at night. I wanted chimpanzee like that. I also wanted to walk to school with a chimpanzee, and even better, ride to school on an elephant with the chimpanzee sitting behind me, and so on. Those were really my childhood dreams. I was totally into that. That really shaped my childhood. By the way, Professor Chimek, my little intro animal that I'm showing you, Chimek always had a little intro animal with him too. And then he would always speak a bit through his nose, that Chimek, and then present an animal. Here I have a little anteater. He comes from the Cologne Zoo. We have him. He was born 2 or 3 months ago or something, and then he would tell the story like that. Or we saved him. He was alone in the wild, or something like that.
Today, I'm accompanied by the Cheetah Man, Cheetah, 3.5 years old.
He belongs to Hans Peter Gob from the Park Villa in Heilbronn.
That's actually how I got the idea to always show a little intro animal at the beginning here on Reptile TV. So in that way, I'm kind of copying Grimek a bit. Exactly. That was a long explanation, but just to make it clear to you, it really was my childhood dream. So that. Or when I read books, you'd read things like Lassie or Flipper, or there were different animal books where the story was told from the animal's perspective. So that's how it all developed for me. It wasn't like I suddenly thought at 20, what should I do for a living? Oh, well, I'll just sell reptiles now. No, it all just evolved naturally. And there's something else I want to tell you about. But for example, so I come from a pretty conservative family. For our annual vacations, we would go to Lake Constance, which is only about a 45-minute drive from here, so we'd just drive there by car, and it was always a really nice vacation. But others, well, they would go to Italy or Turkey or some far-off countries, while the Sprockums, or we would go to the North Sea, for example. That was pretty far, but it was still in Germany. That wasn't really my idea of the big, wide, mysterious world, and that's why, for example, when I heard about jungles or rainforests on TV shows, I would always wonder, what must that be like? What must it really be like, a jungle? I always imagined it like, there's this enclosed forest, and you go in, and suddenly you're in the jungle, and then out of nowhere, there are monkeys hanging from the trees, snakes, and who knows what else. That's how I pictured it, and I still remember exactly how I once talked to my dad about it. I promise. When we get older, we'll go to Africa and explore the jungle and all that. So I still have those memories inside me. And when the time finally came, or when it actually happened, that I really went into the jungle, things are never the way you imagine them. But that doesn't make them any less beautiful. They're just always a little different than you picture them. And that the jungle doesn't just start right here. And it's not like, now the jungle begins, but there are savannas, so what exactly is the jungle? I mean, you could maybe call it rainforest or something like that. I found it really exciting, my life. Actually seeing everything in real life. All those things that, as I said, I always imagined as a kid. Well then. So, I've already told you about my professional career, how it actually started. After school, I joined the military. We still had mandatory service. I did 2 years because I thought, well, this sucks. But I figured whether I do a few more months or not, I'd earn a bit more money. And during my time in the military, that's actually when this terrarium and snake hobby started, and then afterwards, this little business began, which back then was called Marcus and Stefan's Little Reptile Shop, dealing with reptiles. I actually wanted to go to college. I was waiting for that. But that's how my professional journey began, and at some point, I just put the idea of studying aside for a while. So what I'm basically trying to say is that, apart from school, I haven't done anything else my whole life. At around 20 years old, I started trading reptiles, and of course, that also led to all these trips. So it's a good thing that you traveled to some reptile fairs. Back then, in Orlando, Florida, there was the Reptile Breeders Expo. And we often combined that with trips to Central or South America. We go to the Breeders' Expo, check out what new things we might be able to buy. What amazing reptiles were there. Back then, that's when things like albino Burmese pythons started appearing. And then there were also the trips, and those trips were really the fascinating part. In Central America and South America, I remember, we caught anacondas, or rather, we caught them just to take photos. Of course, we didn't take them with us. We were just walking around in the pampas. This was in Bolivia, I think. I always try, while I'm telling these stories, to show you some photos or video clips. Unfortunately, there's not much footage from some of the older trips, but there's a bit more material from the more recent ones. Yeah, like I said, those were my very first experiences, my very first contact with this incredible dream of the jungle, with the wild animals and all that, basically those truly unforgettable trips to Latin America. And then, after a few years had passed, it all really started with Africa. Actually, it all started because of the ball pythons, There, ball pythons were being ranched or farmed by the tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands at the peak times. So the way I do it, because ranching, as I've explained many times before, breeding on farms is called ranching. And so that was the special connection to Africa, where I finally found myself in the truly amazing, vibrant Africa I'd always imagined. Tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of snakes all around me, some in captivity, some out in the wild. So I took the opportunity to see, especially at the beginning, where does a ball python actually live? Well, you go there into, so the Africans always say, into the bush, right? Bush is like the steppe, the savanna of West Africa, right? That's kind of a mix of, extremely humid, extreme humidity, but a mix between grassland steppe, forest edges or areas. So it's more open. So you don't find ball pythons in the forest, but rather in the open grasslands. And there we looked for all kinds of things, anything reptile related that we could find. Like I said, just to be clear, not to catch or take anything with us, but just to discover, photograph, film, and document a little. I think, for me, it was about learning, and I tried to share that through Reptile TV so that you all could also learn about the animals where they live, where they come from. Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This way, you can learn more about how to keep these animals perfectly in captivity. We caught mambas, caught cobras, monitor lizards, scorpions, basically the craziest things. To get back to the topic, all the things I'm telling you now, that's what I've always dreamed of. What truly and deeply fascinated me so much back then, and honestly, even now, of course, when I'm in West Africa. By the way, actually. I've been to West Africa over 50 times in total, so that extreme excitement, that feeling of everything being so new and unfamiliar, unfortunately, just isn't really there anymore, at least not in the same way as before. But the fascination is still there when you say, hey, let's go out today and see if we can film or photograph something. That sense of excitement is definitely still there. The nice people are there, the interesting people that you get to know, no matter whether in Africa or on which continents, met great people who helped you, who were happy for you, whom you could sometimes also help. So there are people now that I maybe haven't seen in person for 10 years, but they say, or maybe now they need my help, just like I've needed their help before. And for example, if someone needs to buy medication, someone I know really well, and I know they're not lying to me, and they say, hey, I need 100 euros. I have to buy medication. There's no health insurance or anything like that there. So I have absolutely no problem helping out in that situation. Maybe what's still missing is the Asian continent, which I haven't even mentioned yet. I've traveled there quite a lot of times too, seen amazing reptiles, but also had some really interesting experiences, whether in China or in Japan. Finding reptiles out in the wild, especially in Japan, really isn't all that easy. However, on the other hand, finding reptiles living in Japanese households is actually much easier. In fact, Japan has a huge and very active reptile community filled with really interesting people, absolutely amazing animals. And there's a lot of breeding going on in Japan too, which is quite fascinating. That's also super exciting. So maybe it's more about the people and the community and the experiences you have there. China and Hong Kong are kind of similar to Japan, or what also comes to mind right now, another highlight from recent years, was Saudi Arabia. Terrarium keeping is really developing there right now. That in itself is already fascinating. But what was also really amazing there was that I got to visit this Euromystics farm. And just in general, Euromystics are already fascinating and amazing animals. The farm itself was really impressive. They actually breed hundreds, even thousands of Euromystics there. The owner himself was a really nice, wonderful person. So that was also part of my dream that I got to experience there. Mauritius Aldabra tortoises. You know, I got to see firsthand how they live there. These absolutely massive, truly gigantic tortoises in what is still, in some parts, truly beautiful and unspoiled natural surroundings on Mauritius. So also all part of this whole, or this entire fascination, right? Now, I've really talked your ear off with my childhood beginnings and then everything that I just experienced there so far. Like I said, it only really hit me again a few weeks ago when I was in Africa, and I thought, who actually gets to experience the kinds of things I've experienced in my life? That really is amazing. I think, in a way, I was lucky that the business actually worked out pretty well. I know it's not always your own doing when a business goes well. Sometimes there's a bit of luck involved, like having the right customers. Of course, discipline also plays a part, making sure you do things properly and well, so you can keep it going for decades and it doesn't go downhill at some point, but instead stays steady or maybe even keeps getting better. Health is an important factor. Luckily, I was never sick in all those decades. I think that makes a big difference, you know. If your health is affected or seriously impaired for some reason, then it's probably not possible to do this. I was incredibly fortunate and lucky in that regard too. So, for me, everything just seemed to work out perfectly, allowing me to truly experience and realize this dream in a special way that I did. So now, the next part. There are plenty of smart tips out there on how to make your dreams come true. I don't really have any particularly good advice, and I don't want to be the one saying, live your dreams and so on. That's actually not really the point. This episode was more about, well, this is how it was for me, you know, just the facts, which is what I always try to focus on a little bit. I just want to show you how it was for me. How I was able to truly fulfill my dream, how I found that sense of purpose and satisfaction right here in my chosen profession, in the work that I do every single day. Just to give you an idea of what I mean and to talk to you a little more about it, I want to share how meaningful this journey has been for me personally. Sometimes, when you're trying to express something so important, it's not that easy to find the right words to really capture what you feel inside. Usually, for me, it just flows out like a waterfall. But sometimes, even today, I find myself stumbling over my words. So yeah, that was my attempt to show you a little bit of it, to illustrate it with some pictures. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments about it, or if you maybe want to talk about your dream yourself, not your trauma, but your dream, feel free to post it down below in the comment section anytime. I'm curious to see if any of you have had similar experiences, or maybe did something like this in a completely different area. I wish every one of you gets to feel that way, and that you don't go to work thinking, ugh, this sucks. I always wanted to do something completely different. Give it a big thumbs up if you really liked it, and please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd be so happy and grateful if you did. Otherwise, please remain loyal and dedicated, and always keep checking in on your dreams.